Hey everyone, how you doing? So, Battle for Neighborville is a very interesting game in many ways. These ways range from something as simple as how characters look, to something as extreme as how this game differs from the other two PvZ shooter games. And while we could sit here and talk about these things all day long, that's ultimately something that I feel isn't necessary at this moment in time. We'll save it for a future video though. No, what I feel like we could discuss now is actually something that not many people on YouTube have tried, and that is tackling the absurdity of this game's patch notes. Yeah, so for those of you who didn't know about this, well, BFN has a wild history with updates. This game played almost completely differently in its beta compared to what we ended up with in modern day. It's a very weird set of circumstances, and because of that, I decided that for my 10,000 subscriber special, now 13,000 because I am so fashionably late, I would make 2 videos on almost every change that the roster got. Now, this is not an easy feat. It's a pretty taxing one at that. So with that being said, I won't be discussing every change here, but I'll be going over the vast majority of the meaningful ones. But listen, with a video like this, you guys know me, and you know I'm gonna frick something up, so just expect it. Alright, so without any further ado, let's get right into it. Starting at Okay, so I can't make a video like this without addressing the elephant in the room, the picnic test. So before BFN was first made public, it had a testing period only referred to as the picnic test. Basically, this test was given to playtesters who immediately leaked it because frick PopCap, I guess. But anyways, there's not much here to document besides Nightcap having 65 HP. I would cover more of the changes made in this beta, but it almost feels like cheating, so really it's only here because I just knew I was going to get a comment about it if I didn't talk about it otherwise. So now that we have that out of the way, let's actually get into the initial versions of BFN, which were Founders was a very exciting time for BFN. PopCap dropped a trailer for the game on the same day that they decided to open its doors, which in retrospect was a terrible decision. But that's neither here nor there, so let's talk about the changes that happened. PopCap got right to work on balancing the game, and they decided to update it in October, 1 month after Founders. A time period where most matches were dominated by a few characters. God, this company sometimes. But regardless, what were the changes made here? Well, going in order, P-Shooter received very minor changes, with one being a bug fix that was listed in the changes, and new effects that show P-Shooter has entered P-Gatling to enemies. Yeah, you know that glow? It wasn't actually there initially. Weird. Chomper received similar changes, with one being a button delay removal, and the other being an improvement to the burrow audio for enemies. Nothing crazy so far. But then we get to Corn, and wow, Corn got massive buffs to his primary and Huskop. All I really need to do is show you the stats, and you could see how big this was. Now, the reason why these changes were made was because Corn was pretty weak in Founders. Like, really weak. So PopCap had to do a bit of a fixer-upper on him, and it only kind of worked. RIP. Well, there's always next patch. Nightcap is this patch's biggest loser by far, sitting at 9 nerfs and only 1 buff. Yikes. I don't think I need to tell you how oppressive she was early on, so these changes explain themselves, but the fact that she was still decent even after all of this shows just how good Nightcap really was. Snapdragon got a healthy amount of changes, with most being buffs to Blue Blazes. I don't really know what the state of the ability was back then, but clearly it wasn't good enough because PopCap giga buffed it here, and would continue to do so. Citron got a few buffs, mostly for Peel Shield, but he also did get a nerf and change to how it works. Notice the XP rate. Do you see that number? Yes, it got changed to what we have today. Now, for those of you who didn't know, do you want to guess how much XP it used to give you for blocking? I'll give you a few seconds to think. Okay, so the number was 40. Yep, I'm being dead serious. It was crazy. God, Founders was something else. Acorn and Oak got changes to specifically Acorn's primary all across the board. Suppose some people complained about it, but I mean, was it that bad? Yes, it was that bad. Oh, and by the way, this did more damage than Corn. Wow. As for our final plant changes, Sunflower and Rose got some pretty minor ones, mostly quality of life things for both themselves and their enemies. Cactus also didn't get any changes, which is why I didn't mention her. So, October in 2019. Not a bad start. It looks like PopCap was cooking up some big changes for the plant roster in this time period, and they desperately needed it too. As it stood, some characters were still very outclassed by their peers, so in the following updates, PopCap would try to remedy this, with these updates being November was the month where PopCap wanted to get their crap together. Kind of. Yeah, at some point during the month, PopCap said that December would bring even bigger changes, so November was just a weird waiting period. I guess we'll cover some of the things they did here, so let's get into it. Getting this right out of the way, pea shooter, corn, acorn, and sunflower did not receive any changes. I have no idea why poor corn in particular didn't get so much as a damage buff here, but fine, whatever. We'll wait for his buffs later. As for the others, Chomper received just ability changes here, a buff for Grody Goop, and a nerf for Spikeweed. Now, I want you to keep a mental note of Grody Goop in the back of your mind here, because this was actually a time before Grody Goop was busted. Besides that though, nothing too interesting here. Nightcap got a singular buff, and even then it was just a bug fix. So yay, I guess? Snapdragon received another large amount of buffs, with these being for his primary and abilities. I guess Snap really wasn't all that good back then, because this is the second set of patch notes where he got a bunch of buffs. Weird. Cactus was unfortunately not as lucky with her changes, as she got a few upgrade nerfs, bug fixes, and garlic drone changes. What I want to pay attention to here in particular is Alacrity, as this upgrade wasn't touched at all once it got changed here. Compared to the Deadbeard upgrade that works the same way, these changes made her upgrade comparatively much weaker, which is a bummer. Citron received a few changes here, most of which being buffs and a few minor nerfs. This month was overall much kinder to Citron, even if he didn't really deserve it. And I'm saying that for a reason, he's really good. Acorn might not have gotten any changes, but Oak? Nah, they gave Oak some early damage buffs. I have no idea why, but I mean, sure, why not? We'll just make an already tanky character even more powerful. For our final character here, Rose was surprisingly blessed in this update. Like, she got 13 buffs. What the frick? There is genuinely nothing I have to say about these changes, except for the fact that Rose was clearly still not good because she got even more buffs in December. So November was a turbulent month for these characters. I'm honestly surprised that PopCap made the changes they did to most characters, considering how insane December gets. So with that being said, let's get into that month next. Oh boy, there's a lot to cover here. So December was the month where PopCap decided that if everybody was broken, then nobody was. And that's a good call because this was the patch where nobody got left out and everybody benefited. So with that being said, let's get into it. Pea Shooter's raw damage and splash damage was buffed all the way to what we were used to in Garden Warfare 2. That is a good start, considering how this is actually what our modern stats for him look like to this day. Heat Cannon also got a minor camera recoil reduction, which is just a nice little bonus. Chomper had a massive damage increase, now making his chomp very lethal. Slobber Shot also got a decent buff, along with a projectile change too. Finally, the splash damage for his Halitosis upgrade was increased even more as well, making his potential damage per Slobber Shot near 50. To this day, that is still one of the craziest changes ever put in this game, it's wild. Corn finally got his much deserved buff here too, now actually dealing semi-competent damage with his primary. We take those. Unfortunately, that's kind of all he got, so it's not a complete win, but it is what it is. Nightcap got a damage increase on her primary, now dealing even more damage than she did in Founders. And honestly, this wasn't a bad change. Quite the opposite, she actually needed it in this patch. Snapdragon got a few good buffs, mostly with his primary and secondary. There's not much to say here, it's just good changes. Cactus is a weird one though, because her damage was buffed, but she got some nerfs too. More specifically, nerfs that dealt with her ammo. So her ammo count increased to 40, but to compensate, the charge level ammo count also got increased. Garlic Drone also got nerfed in this update, which is pretty strange. But overall, she still improved a little bit. And oh look, seems like Citron also got a few nerfs. But don't worry, his damage increased. In very heavy air quotes. 2.55 to 2.6. You know what? That breaks so many damage thresholds. I gotta hand it to PopCap. That's genius. How could we have ever known that this was the most broken change of all time? Okay, I'm obviously joking here, and frankly, there's not much else to say. Citron did not need a buff here, but just you wait, he'll get some more in the future. Acorn and Oak got massive buffs in this update, 11 to be exact. And wow, these are all pretty insane. What's even crazier to me is that most of these have to do with Acorn and not Oak. Like, did Acorn really need this many buffs? Are you trying to give viability to the little guy? Because guess what? It works like a goddamn charm. This single update might have unintentionally led to a lot of people playing Acorn over Oak. And yeah, I don't blame those people. Somehow, Sunflower got even more buffs, with a vast majority of them having to do with her primary. And yeah, that's pretty disgusting. They basically made it one of the most consistent in the game, and the damage makes it better than Corn and Foot Soldier's primaries. So to compensate for that insanity, she got 2 nerfs. One for her ammo, and one for Blossom, which was one of her most broken upgrades anyways. And last but certainly not least is Rose, who got even more buffs and several nerfs. You know, I heard that she was pretty good during this time period, but I don't want to believe that because, wow, there is a lot of crap here. This is just sad. So December rolled around and gave us quite a lot of changes. Most of these were positive, with some being not so good. But overall, this update made BFN feel a lot faster, which is honestly what matters here. So why did they keep making changes? So I guess PopCap didn't feel like they did enough in December because in January, they decided to make some more changes to certain characters. Not all of them, but some. Those who were left out are Snapdragon, Cactus, Citron, and Sunflower. So with that being said, let's start out with Pea-Shooter. Specifically, his homing upgrade got nerfed, and if you didn't know about this, homing Pea actually used to be pretty good. So the fact that it got nerfed here was probably for the better. Oh, and if you think this looks rough, just wait. As for Chomper, Chomp was buffed. And that's all I have to say. Noted. Corn got a nerf, and it was to his projectile speed. You just can't let this plant win, can you, PopCap? Nightcap got a buff, ironically being the opposite of Corn's nerf. This was probably a good change, but because Corn got fricked over in the process, I don't appreciate it. Acorn and Oak got some changes, mostly to their primaries and to Saptrap. Primaries nerfed, Saptrap buffed. Okay then. As for Rose, she got nerfs to her rate of fire and to Time Snare, one of her upgrades. I can't lie, that seems pretty unnecessary, but whatever. So January was a pretty small update, but it was one with a few changes nonetheless. And I suppose PopCap felt like they did a good job here because it would be over a month before they made any more changes, with the next patch happening in March. Was a weird patch. Not because it was necessarily bad or anything, but because it was basically our final small patch in BFN. There's not much to discuss here besides those who didn't receive changes, which is just Citron. Honestly, probably for the better that they left him out. So starting with Pea-Shooter, his Beam Bomb got a partial rework, and his Beam Party upgrade got an increased cooldown reduction. Nothing crazy going on here, just some tweaks. Chomper got some minor buffs, mostly having to do with his abilities. Again, nothing crazy, so we'll just move on. But my boy Corn, on the other hand, he's actually pretty interesting. He got some big changes. Okay, not really, but it's still interesting. One change here in particular is actually the first change PopCap ever made to a legendary upgrade, and it was a documented bug fix. Great. Okay, we'll move on. Nightcap got a few nerfs, mostly having to do with casting shadows and a couple of upgrades. Now the term nerfs being used here is definitely opinion for casting shadows because this was arguably a slight rework of the ability. Regardless, it was small changes. Snapdragon also got some pretty small changes, with most having to do with Blue Blazes and Flameblower. Not much else I could say here, these are pretty simple. Cactus got a single change, and it has to do with their Popcorn upgrade. Now it triggers on any Vanquish randomly instead of being critical ones. Neat buff or neat nerf. Not sure what to say. Acorn and Oak got some weird changes. Acorn got buffs to a supporting and treetop turret mode, and a couple of other random changes. Oak got some similar random changes, along with a few fixes here and there. Not much else I can add on. Sunflower got a surprising amount of changes here, mostly to do with Sunny Side Up and some upgrades. The only thing I want to mention in particular that I find interesting is Blossom, which makes it so that Sunflower cannot heal herself when using the upgrade. Wait, hang on, I genuinely did not know this. What the frick? Why was she able to do that? Finally, Rose got an Arcane Enigma rework and a Godify nerf. Rose is boring, so we're moving on. March was kind to some characters, and not so kind to others. But this wouldn't be the end of the patches, oh no. We've got another major one to cover, that being May was a big patch for BFN, and there's a lot to cover here. So let's not sit here and twiddle our thumbs, let's just get into it. Pea-Shooter got massive changes. There's so many. I can't discuss all of them, but at the very least, I'll bring up some of the more important ones. First of all, P-Cannon can now fire automatically, which feels amazing, by the way. Glad they made that change. Last Ditch got a buff, with it now being pretty worthwhile to use. And possibly the biggest change here, Homing P got a huge nerf, now basically being a worse version of Rose's homing. So overall, P-Shooter got some pretty big changes, and yeah, good for him. Chomper also got some big changes here, starting with Grody Goop. Okay, so Grody Goop was a pretty meh ability when it first came out. Like, it wasn't absolutely horrible, but it wasn't all that great either. And yet, PopCap felt like they had to give it some pretty big buffs, because wow, it just got buffed from 45 damage to 85. 85! That is enough to kill an imp on its own. What the frick? Why did this change get made? Who can I take legal action against for this? Jokes aside, this was a very unnecessary change, and compared to the other actual quality of life changes here, this one just looks out of place. Like, we could be celebrating the fact that Chomp is now automatic, but no, Grody Goop just had to become broken. Okay, PopCap, noted. My boy Corn got some changes, mostly to Shogun Guard, and it still isn't that good. Moving on. Nightcap got 2 reworks, at least that's how I look at them. Her primary is stronger now, only it isn't as easy to use, and Feng Fu, you know what? I can't explain this. You see the notes, you see the changes, I just don't know whether to call it a buff or a nerf. Snapdragon got a few changes to his secondary and Blue Blazes, but that's really about it for him. Cactus got changes to her potato mines, Garlic Drone's ability, and an upgrade. Again, not really much to say, but Citron. Wow, Citron just had to come back, didn't he? As if he wasn't already good enough, he got a goddamn damage buff in this update. I honestly had no idea about this until I was doing research for this video. It's stupid. EM Peach also got some buffs against certain characters, which I just find to be insanely stupid. Like, seriously? This is pissing me off even reading it. We're moving on. Acorn and Oak got some small changes, and frankly, these aren't too interesting, so I won't really give them much attention here. Except for Invoke Oak. Why was there a time period where you could be invulnerable while using this? Why? Why was that a thing? Sunflower has some interesting changes. Sunbeam got some pretty big buffs, Heal Beam got a fix, and some upgrades got minor changes. Overall, this was a pretty productive patch for Sunflower. And last but certainly not least is Rose. And she got another change to Arcane Enigma. Wow, they just could not leave this ability alone, could they? Regardless, it's a pretty underwhelming way to end off this patch, but that's not actually where things end. There's still one last patch we need to cover, which is the final patch of BFN. Wow, this one was huge. Bigger than May, but not because of actual character changes. No. These were mostly upgrade changes. And because of that, I don't feel any particular need to go over all of them. But regardless, I'll discuss the interesting ones because frankly, it's a neat topic. P-Shooter got a lot of upgrade changes. Some were good, such as Reload Gatling getting a buff that gives it the potential to work infinitely, but others were not so fortunate, like Escape Routes. This upgrade already wasn't that good, did they need to nerf it? Chomper also got a ton of changes, such as a partial Grody Goop buff. You can't make this crap up. The only thing in particular that I want to mention is Vampiric Spikeweed, which became really good, and it makes me wonder how bad it was before these changes. I can only imagine how rough that was. First of all, for Corn, he got a hitbox change. No, I am not kidding. Poor guy didn't even have his final hitbox until the last update. I feel so bad. In addition to this, loads of his upgrades got changed. Some of the highlights here include the Giga buff to Super Spin that we're used to nowadays, Rapid Recob essentially doubling everything it could do before, and Happy Feet getting a nerf. Why? Nightcap got some interesting changes, Shadow Sneak got a couple of quality of life updates, and Feng Fu got a minor rework. Some upgrades were also changed too, but these aren't all that interesting to me, so we'll move on. Snapdragon's final update nerfed his burn duration a ton, and to compensate, a lot of his upgrades got buffed. This is so weird to look at, because before this update, Snapdragon probably played completely differently. I mean, look at Incendiary as an example. This upgrade didn't have the cooldown reduction added on until the final update. Isn't that crazy? This character by far got some of the most changes in the game. Cactus got some final tweaks to her abilities and her secondary, along with a bunch of upgrade changes. Out of all of these, the one that sticks out to me the most has to be Mirage, which used to cost 3 points. Why? Needless to say, this was a good final patch for Cactus, that's for sure. Citron got some interesting changes, I suppose. The shield got buffed, and EM Peach got some extra counters too. Along with this, he got some insane upgrade changes, like emergency exit getting a buff. Why? His changes are small, but definitely noticeable if you look hard enough. As for Acorn and Oak, they both got one final set of changes to their snap traps and a bunch of upgrade reworks. The one that intrigues me the most out of this bunch has to be Slapback, which gained the ability to launch Oak 2. This is wild to me, because it feels like an upgrade named Slapback should have been able to do that in the first place. But no, I guess PopCap didn't question that until it was almost too late. Out of every main character in this patch, Sunflower by far got the least amount of changes, but regardless, these were still pretty big. Cocoon got buffed, Vampflower got minorly nerfed, more upgrades were changed, but there's one thing here that kinda makes me laugh whenever I see it, that being Stuffy Sundrop. Yeah, did you know that the Sundrops used to drop on enemies instead of yourself? What was the point of using it? Rose is next, and oh my god, she has so many changes. The biggest ones here are for Thornapart, which got a massive buff, and it's still not that good. Fun. Her primary got buffed too, which is nice, and I don't want to cover anything else here. Rose is boring. We're moving on. Finally, we have Wildflower, which actually did receive some changes. They got a melee attack, their drone was nerfed to 110 damage instead of 125. Yes, that was a thing, look at old footage. And the upgrade flower food was locked. So, productive patch for Wildflower, I suppose. At least now I'm not dying to that stupid drone as a foot soldier. So that was a basic rundown on every documented change to BFN's plant characters. Yeah, we haven't even done zombies yet, and I'm sure you can see the video length at this point. I'm gonna save that video for next month because there is no goddamn way I'm covering them here too. It would just take me too long. But now I'm curious, what changes surprised you guys the most for plants? Were there any changes here that you thought were good? Did you think any were bad? Tell me your thoughts and more in the comments down below. And if you're new around here and you like what you saw, then maybe consider subscribing too. It helps me out a ton, and this video wouldn't exist if I didn't hit that 10k milestone a couple of months back. So I'd appreciate you clicking on that button if you were interested. Once again, thank you all for now 13,000 subscribers, and I'll see you guys in my next video where I'm not stumbling on my words. Peace.